You may have heard the phrase, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And in my talk today, I'll tell you about how you can create the future, participating in the future of Java. So first, a little bit about me. Heather Vancura. I'm the chairperson and director of the Java Community Process program. I've been involved with the Java community since I started working at Sun Microsystems back in 2000, so since the Java 1.2 release. I work in California. I've seen Java through quite a few changes over the last 19 years, so I'll share some perspectives with you on that. I have an opportunity to travel and visit developers all around the world. This year I've been in Asia, and my first time speaking in Singapore, I was speaking at the Voxxed Day Melbourne last year, so I'm happy that Voxxed Day Singapore invited me to share here with you today. If there's anything that I don't cover in the talk that you want to follow up with me about, Twitter's a great place to do that. You can follow me on Twitter at HeatherVC. So first of all, talking about the growth of Java as a programming language, Java still today continues to be the #1 programming language in the world. We've now grown to have over 12 million Java developers all around the world, with 38 billion active virtual machines and 21 billion of those connected to the cloud. And that's pretty unique in terms of the fact that, like I just shared, Java's been around for over 2 decades now, and it still continues to grow in popularity and remains the #1 programming language. And in my role that as overseeing the Java community process, I looked back and started to think about why is that? What's different about Java, and what does it uniquely offer to the community of Java developers? And when I look at these things, they have remained quite consistent over time. And as I share with you in my talk about the things happening with the platform in terms of its completeness and continued focus on quality and security, as well as how to modernize the platform and bring in more innovation. And then in addition, the uniqueness of Java in terms of the ecosystem and the way Java is evolved that you'll learn about in terms of bringing in the active participation from the community, but at the same time maintaining the compatibility that's so vital to the success of the language and will continue to be in the future. And a lot of these things, especially the transparency and the ecosystem and the community, come back to the Java community process. As we're now getting ready to celebrate 20 years of the Java community process, it has been around since almost the beginning of the Java platform when Java was introduced back in 1995, and there's been a lot of changes in the community over that time. So I thought I'd share with you just a little bit about the evolution, and if you've followed any of the recent news, you know there have been a lot of changes in the community over the last couple of years, but also at the same time recognizing, I think if you take a look at just some of the milestones in time that I listed here, you can see that there's been a lot of changes with the Java community since the very beginning. And the thing that is unique about Java is that the community as a whole always seems to be able to adapt and evolve with those changes. And part of that is the role that I have in running the JCP in terms of the way that we listen to the Java developer community and change over time. And I think Oracle plays a really unique role in this too, in terms of being the steward of Java technology, but also recognizing and strongly believing that Java is about more than any one company. It really is about the whole ecosystem of vibrant Java developers working for different types of companies and wanting to include those because that benefits Java. It also benefits Oracle, and it also benefits all the companies around the world that have built their business on Java. And the way that we do that is through the structure and foundation that's provided in the Java community process. So since most Java developers, unless I've given a talk at their Java user group or Java developer conference, don't really know quite what the JCP is and how it works, I'll spend just about 10 minutes giving you an overview of what is the JCP, and then I'll talk about some of the Java platform changes that have happened over the last couple of years and the changes that you can look for coming in the next 1 to 2 years, as well as how you can participate in the programs. So starting with the structure, the JCP looks a little bit like this in terms of an organization. So I'm the chairperson of the Java community process. The Java community process also has a board of directors, so to speak, called the executive committee. So I'm the chairperson of that executive committee, and I have a small staff that supports me in running the organization, but the real work of the Java platform and of the JCP itself is really done by the community and the membership of the JCP program, and that's done through JSRs. Probably most developers have at least heard of the term JSR, but JSR is really the foundation of the work that happens through the Java community process. Every specification that becomes part of the Java platform is a JSR, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about what a JSR is, but essentially the bulk of the work is done by the community. Really, the structure that is provided by the JCP is an oversight to help enable that participation and work to happen by members of the community, led by a specification lead who is a JCP member, and that spec lead for every JSR is responsible for collecting an expert group, so a JSR expert group to participate on the JSR, and then also collecting feedback from more members of the community to ensure that as the technology is developed, it takes into account the experience and requirements of the entire Java community before it can be put into any shipping code projects or products in development. And this is done primarily through volunteers. A lot of the corporate members do pay their employees to participate in this process, but a good majority of the participants in the JSR process are actually individuals as well. And that, I think, is a unique thing as, to look at in terms of evolving a language, that this is done by people who are passionate about the technology that they're using, and I asked them why they would want to do this. And what I found was that oftentimes they're doing it to advance their career, and that makes sense because I often get questions from developers about how to advance their career, how to become a part of the community, how to increase their visibility. And what a lot of Java developers has found is that being a participant in evolving the future of the language really helps them to be staying on top of the curve in terms of what's changing and what's coming next with the language, but also to increase that visibility as an expert, both within their company as well as in their local communities. And then the other perspective that I found when I asked people was that joining JCP is really just part of being a part of the Java community. It's like being a Java citizen. So participating in a JSR is done by the spec leads with the expert group, and the way that this is done is ensuring that every JSR delivers 3 things, and this comes back to what's unique about Java. So in the JCP, a JSR isn't just the code, it's the specification, so that's why you see Java so thoroughly documented through the specification that's required by the JCP, and the code, which is a reference implementation. And then the third thing that really boosts the entire ecosystem is the compatibility test suite, the TCK. So that enables independent implementations and a variety of choices for developers. So you don't have just the one implementation, but you have a reference implementation and then the ability to create multiple implementations of each JSR. And every JSR follows the same life cycle, including formal reviews and votes by the executive committee. So I mentioned the executive committee. That's really the main role of the executive committee, is to vote and approve every JSR before it can be declared final. Whether that's the Java platform itself led by Oracle or other standalone JSR technologies led by community members of the JCP membership. And associate members can also participate on JSRs as contributors. So those 3 things really work together, the RI, the specification, and the TCK, to provide the foundation of the ecosystem. The specification is telling you how to build an implementation. The reference implementation is like the proof of concept, essentially. And then the test suite enables independent implementers to take the specification, build their own implementation apart from the reference implementation provided with the JSR, run the TCK against their implementation, and therefore create compatible implementations. So that's why you have this variety of robust choices and an ecosystem that's been built up around Java that's about more than just the platform. And the other part of this is ensuring that it's an international effort, that we have development participations for all around the world. I've seen this grow particularly over the last 10 years as a shift from North America and EMEA only to really being a representation across other parts of the world, including Asia with quite a bit of participation, Africa and South America. So again, while there are a lot of commonalities with the developers I visit, when I go to developer conferences, you always find things that are a little bit different as well. So it's important to have that perspective from people working in all different parts of the world, as well as the perspective of members and developers working for different types of organizations. And that's another thing that's changed over time, is including a diverse membership beyond just the corporations and vendors that are building their business on Java, but companies that are using Java. So companies like Twitter, banks like Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, also nonprofit and open source groups. That's changed over time since Java was first introduced. So we have groups like the Apache Software Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, and Java user groups. That's a unique thing that Java has a really strong user group community of nearly 400 user groups around the world, including one here in Singapore. And Java user groups also are invited to participate in the individual developer as well, working on their own. And we have that representation in our executive committee as well. The other role that the executive committee plays is looking at changes in the community and the ecosystem and how we should change the structure of the JCP to adapt to that through 25 members, but also representing all the different types of developers. And those members of our executive committee are actually elected by the JCP program membership. Every year in the fall timeframe, we have our annual elections. So if you're a JCP member, you help to elect these members every year. And the other unique thing about the JCP and how it's structured before I move on is it's open standards and open source. So since we did migrate to an open source license of Java over 10 years ago, that continues to be a question that comes up. Well, now that Java's an open source project developed in OpenJDK, why do we still need the JCP? And we continue to maintain that we need both a standard that's enabled by the JCP, and it should be developed in an open source manner. So open source is an important requirement to enable the adoption of the technology, but standards are important too, and we continue to maintain that that will be the case in the future as well. So looking forward into the future over the next few years, as I said I would share with you, new revisions of the Java platform, reforms to our organization overall, and increased participation from the community. Those are the three things that I'll share with you in the time that we have left for this session. So I'll start with new revisions of the platform. So the OpenJDK project is the reference implementation for the Java platform, and there's been some changes introduced over the last couple years that I'll share with you, and share with you also the future directions of the Java platform, where that's going. So OpenJDK organizes their projects as JEPs, Java Enhancement Proposals, and those JEPs feed up into the JCP. So that's the relationship between the JCP and OpenJDK. The development of the JEPs is done in OpenJDK, and those roll up into a JSR, which is approved by the JCP Executive Committee before it becomes final. And the Java SE platform is now in its last major release at version 12. That is something that takes a few developers by surprise because we've moved to a faster release cadence starting in 2017. New Java platforms every 6 months. So starting with Java 9, in the introduction of modularity through Project Jigsaw, we introduced a faster release cadence. So that means that every 6 months, there will be a new release of Java, and migrating to a modular system really enabled us to be able to have that faster release cadence. And Going back to the philosophies I mentioned in the beginning about modernization and innovation, that is really going to help us to accelerate modernizing the platform and continuing to attract younger and newer developers who are more accustomed to seeing technology platforms change and come out with new releases on a more frequent basis to accelerate the innovation. So I'll share with you some of how that's moving forward. The other thing that was introduced with Java 9 was the concept of a long-term support release. So that's new to the Java community, but similar to other technology platforms, the idea of a long-term support release. So while we'll have new releases coming out every 6 months, only every 3 years will there be releases that are long-term support. And the community has also grown to adopt this long-term support as well. So Oracle will offer long-term support, and then there's other downstream distributions that also are offering long-term support for their releases following this pattern. So after Java 8, Java 11 became the first long-term support release, and the next one will be Java 17. And thirdly, the other change that was announced in 2017 with the release of Java 9 was that Oracle would open source many of their proprietary commercial features that were primarily part of Oracle's JDK into OpenJDK. But still using the same process like I talked to you about through Java enhancement proposals, feeding up into the JSR through the JCP, and that was done progressively over time. So after the last 2 years, that's now complete. All of the features that were previously proprietary are now open sourced in Java in OpenJDK. So that also helped to increase the innovations into the platform, particularly with flight recorder and mission control, some really exciting features for the platform that are now available in the open source version of OpenJDK. So JDK 9 was released in 2017. That's when we started this new release model. And if you've been a Java developer for any amount of time, you know that moving between version used to happen every 3 to 4 years. So prior to Java 9, we had Java 8, introduced in 2014. And quite a significant amount of changes would be typical to go into any major Java release. It would be a project to migrate. It would take multiple months on development teams to migrate because it was usually had such a significant amount of changes. So with Java 9, between Java 8 and Java 9, 100 new features. A lot of people think it was just modularity and Project Jigsaw. There were actually all the other things that the OpenJDK team and community have been working on for the last 3+ years. So significant changes and new features going into starting with Java 9 from Java 8. But if you look at Java 10, which was the release that came out 6 months later, it was the first feature release coming 6 months later in March 2018. That had only 12 new enhancement proposals, so 100 versus 12. So that's one of the most common questions that come up when we talk about moving to a faster release cadence is how will people be able to migrate to the new versions? It takes so much time to migrate between Java platform versions. And what we've seen since we've had now a couple of these 6-month releases is that there typically is just not as many changes that you're going to need to be making to your applications when you're moving between Java platforms once you move past Java 8. And I think we're just now at that point where people are really thinking it's the time to move past Java 8, but it's something to keep in mind as you think about what your new model for updates are going to be, right? Once you move past Java 8, there's going to be more incremental changes coming forward. And also innovation coming in more quickly because these things that came out 6 months later after Java 9 that came out in March 2018 are things that typically, if we'd been on the same type of release model, you would have had to wait 3 or 4 years to start using in the platform. So you're going to be able to see innovations coming out of the projects that will continue in OpenJDK, and I'll share with you some of the more interesting projects that you can get involved in follow now. They'll come out as they're ready, so we won't wait for one of the major projects to be completely finished. As Java enhancement proposals are ready and to be integrated into the mainline, they will be, and they'll be integrated into a platform and put up for by a vote of the executive committee to go into the next release of the platform. So Java 11 came out 6 months later in September 2018. 17 enhancement proposals were new in that release. We did see quite a bit of uptake from the Java community. So the community built up around Java, the build tools in the ecosystem, the IDEs have been able to keep up with this faster release cadence. Still working with the community to accelerate adoption of this, but what we're seeing is, if you check out on Twitter, I have the hashtag here, works like heaven on JDK 11. So we've been making an effort to maintain that the ecosystem continues to migrate and make their tools and builds available to the community on the latest release of Java, and also looking at how we can continue to increase external contributors and committers to the project. So for instance, with JDK 11, Shenandoah was included, which was a major contribution from Red Hat. Sorry, excuse me, that's on my next slide, Java 12, Shenandoah. So Java 12 is the latest release that you can get today, 8 new features coming into that. Also with Java 12, we saw the introduction of switch expressions, which is a new concept into OpenJDK of preview features. So that's a preview feature that you can try out in JDK 12. And several other new features in JDK 12 as well. But essentially, this is the release that you can download today. That's available if you go to OpenJDK. The most current release is JDK 12, that's March 2019. And JDK 13 is currently being developed. You can go to OpenJDK to see some of the JEPs that we're looking at being targeted for that release in September of this year. We do have early access builds out already for this, so while you can't use JDK 13 in production yet, in development you can download it. Every 2 weeks we put out new builds as new things get integrated into them. And so we have on the project page table where we talk about things that are candidates for the release. And as we get closer, there'll be a page just like this one that will have features that intend to be integrated. So coming up very shortly, you'll have a page just like the ones I showed for JDK 12, where you can see the features that are targeted for that release that's scheduled to come out in September, just a few months away. And that's one of the things that I like to encourage developers to do, is to start getting in the habit of going to the project page of Java 13, and as we move forward, we'll have the next one, 14, 15, 16, and download the early access builds. That's one way to stay ahead of the curve and to see what new features are coming. So whether or not you decide that you're going to migrate to that version or not, you can at least run your applications against the build and see what changes you might need to make to start migrating to a different kind of migration model for your applications, where it's more of a continuous delivery, agile way, rather than waiting every 3 to 4 years to have a project for migration, but do it on a more continuous basis and evaluating whether that's a version that you're going to migrate to. And again, that's once you've moved past Java 8. So beyond that, what are we looking at? As I mentioned, we've had traditionally these projects that are developed in OpenJDK, and typically we'll pick one particular one and then focus on that for the next release. But what we're seeing now beyond, for Java 13 and beyond, we'll continue to put the work into these projects, but as things are ready, they'll come out of the projects over time. And the pipeline for the new features in Java is incredibly strong. There are also some particular areas that the team is focusing on. And I think this slide can help you to think about maybe some of the projects that you might want to get involved in, which kind of leads me into my next section of my talk. How will you get involved? How will you participate? So obviously, number one priority in evolving the platform is security. Will continue to be the focus moving forward, but then we have also some other areas where we're looking to make improvements in the platform, and then I've mapped those to the projects that I'm going to talk about. In terms of if this is an area of interest or expertise for you, you can go to that project and follow along on the work that they're doing, whether you're a member or not. So all this work is happening in OpenJDK. These projects are open, so that means they have an open discussion forum as well as downloads that are available for you to follow along the discussions and perhaps contribute if that's an interest of yours or something that you have expertise or feedback to share. So starting with Project Valhalla, that's one that's going on to introduce value types. So it's about optimizing code, object data layout in Project Valhalla. In Project Portola, focusing on continuing to have Java be the first choice for deployments in the cloud. So this will be focusing on optimizing Java in a world of containers. That's Project Portola. Project ZGC is a scalable low latency garbage collector. This is now targeted to be in the September release. So it's Java JDK 13, Project ZGC. Project Panama is another one. So I think I've seen a lot in the press that I've read locally here as well as around the world about big data and machine learning. So making Java an ideal choice in the artificial intelligence space. So work done to optimize Java to be ready for that space is being done in Project Panama. And next, Project Loom. So an update to the concurrency model is being worked in Project Loom. The goal of Project Loom that's being discussed is how can millions of fibers be spawned into a single JVM instance. And finally, Project Amber. So Project Amber will add new things over time, but it's a collection of smaller language improvements. The switch expressions that I mentioned earlier going into JDK 12 is a project that came out of Project Amber, so a JEP that came out of Project Amber. So new things will be added here that are smaller language improvements that don't fit into those major projects. One that I didn't make a slide for, and I think someone just mentioned earlier, and there's been a lot of interest in, is Project Metropolis, which is focused on the Growl JVM, so you can check that one out as well. And some of the projects have their own early access builds, project-specific builds, for instance, Panama and Valhalla. So if that's one of the projects that you're interested in, when you go to jdk.java.net to download the latest available release or the early access build of the release that's currently being worked on, you can also download builds of the projects that you might be interested in. So I encourage you to get involved in OpenJDK. A great place to see updates on what's happening in OpenJDK is following them on Twitter or joining any of the projects that I just mentioned, if any of those appeal to you. That's a great way to get involved and participate in the evolution of those projects. In addition, we now have updated Java training certifications available through Oracle University, and if you are a Java user group member, there's currently a 25% off discount if you wanted to take the Java 11 certification. So I think that update completes updates to the platform. So the second thing I talked about is with all these changes in the community, how will the JCP as an organization that supports this evolution and provides the foundation for it evolve to keep up the pace with the changes in the ecosystem? And we do that through an effort called jcp.next, and that's another role of the executive committee. I lead that work as the JSR spec lead for this work, and we use the same JSR process to evolve the program itself to keep up with the needs of the changing community and ecosystem. And some of the changes that we've made focus on three particular areas, the first being transparency. So the work for Java is all done in the open, done through open mailing lists, open bug trackers, and we've adapted the processes and requirements of the JCP to mandate that. So that means that we used to specify a spec and a reference implementation and a test suite had to be developed, but we didn't say necessarily how. Now we require that that is all done in the open and done in an open source manner. So everything's open to the public, including the work of the EC itself. We've also changed the structure of the executive committee. We've merged it into one and reduced some of the seats. We're also thinking about resizing it even further in 2019, one executive committee to oversee one Java platform. And then looking at how we can increase participation, since we're working in a different world of not only working in an open source methodology, but also moving faster and more continuous delivery method in a more agile way. When the JCP was first developed, it was structured more around the waterfall development techniques. So we've changed the life cycle of how things are developed as well as how you can participate. So broadening our membership and all of the things that the JCP is set up to do is to try to eliminate any barriers that exist to that happening, which include eliminating any fees, everything can be joined electronically, as well as looking at ways for individuals to participate without actually requiring them to go and have their employer sign a lengthy agreement. So what that means is we now have membership levels in the JCP where it used to be one size fit all that was really more designed for a corporation's participation, now multiple types of participation. So we have associate members, which is designed for individuals that want to participate separate from their employment. Partner memberships for Java user groups or nonprofit groups, people that want to bring feedback from their community into the development process. And then we continue to have the full members, which is for corporations, but also some individuals. So individuals, if their employer agrees that they want them to do this on their own, or particularly a use case that was important for this field is university professors, which we have quite a few university professors participating in the JCP JSR expert group process. So we wanted to continue to maintain those types of participants, but also open it up to new types of participants like open source groups, Java user groups, and individual developers. So now we have different levels of membership and then a streamlined JSR development lifecycle. So what that looks like is fewer concrete milestones, fewer votes by the executive committee, and more open development process. So as the work is done in open source, it's a longer open development period, and then followed by a formal concrete close and review and a vote by the executive committee, and then immediately followed by a final release. So streamlining that process where we used to have more concrete milestones to be more in keeping with the way Java and all software around the world is currently developed. So that's streamlining the JCP program. That was taken into effect end of 2018, and we're going to continue to evolve the process over time. Just like the work of the Java platform, our work's done in the open as well, so you can follow that along if you want to under the jcp.org EC section of the website. So those are the changes that we've made to the overall structure of the JCP, making it more open than it was before and keeping up to date with changes in the Java platform. But that leaves the question of how will you participate? As a team, we found that groups of developers coming together, whether that's through their local Java user group or another meetup group, or through small groups in your employer, you can help each other, teach each other, work together, and actually provide feedback that's more valuable and collective, and as well as give support to each other. So you can participate as an individual, but some of the ways that I'm going to suggest to you are really designed for you to participate with a small group of other developers. But keep that in mind. You can participate either way. But what we found in working with different groups of communities around the world is that working together we can achieve more. Java user groups around the world have joined the JCP and contributed in this way, but even just especially this year on this trip I've been taking through the APAC region, I've had increasing interest from groups of developers working at a company where they want to get together and maybe talk about which particular project they might want to contribute to. So Java user groups working together through an effort called Adopt a JSR is something that's a possibility you could investigate here in your local user group in the Singapore Java meetup. We have groups around the world working on this to drive adoption, to help each other, to educate on the changes that are coming, and also to contribute their comments and their feedback. So one of the things that I always like to do is highlight some of the more significant contributions that Java user groups have made. And I'm going to share with you in 5 steps how you would go about doing that, whether you wanted to do it through the local user group here, who's part of organizing this event, or if you're not from Singapore, taking it back to your local user group, or working within your organization to have a small group effort to think about how you might want to contribute to the evolution of The platform. So first thing is, and this actually you can translate this to almost any open source project you want to work on, and that really is one of the best ways to advance your career, is to dedicate some time to work on an open source project. But this is all designed to be specific to the structure of the Java platform, but you can translate this to almost any project that you want to get involved in. The first thing you need to do is pick a project, right? So pick a JSR, whether that be the platform itself, the projects that are being developed in OpenJDK, or some of the standalone JSRs that are currently being developed in the JCP. There are several. Which are maybe, I didn't really mention this earlier, but there's the concept of a standalone JSR, which is designed for the Java platform, but not intended to be delivered as part of a platform release. So it's in the Java X namespace, but it's an optional package. So things like the money and currency API, also right now being developed is a visual recognition API, which is focused on the visual aspect of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Units of measurement, which is focused on the embedded space, and then there's also a desktop application API, which is focused on the desktop environment. So pick something that you're interested in. If it's the platform, obviously you want to probably get more specific in terms of what particular project, but the Java SE13 JSR 388 obviously is also an option. So every JSR has a page that looks exactly the same. So you would go to that project page and follow the links, right? So follow the links to the download, follow the links to the expert group communication, follow the link to the issue tracker. So all of those things are available on one page. That's providing that transparency that I talked to you about, and it's the same for every JSR. So every JSR has the same requirements and follows the same process. So read up on the project, whatever it is, go to the home page and get yourself up to speed on some of the issues currently being worked and some of the discussions in terms of directions that the group is intending to take. And then the second step, which is really critical, and what I found in working with some groups is that it's often missed, is communication. So letting the project lead know of your interests. So introducing yourself, a little bit about you or your group, and then what your particular area of interest is, and also asking, if you have a particular thing you have in mind that you'd like to contribute, asking if that would be useful, and then asking also for suggestions of other things that they're interested in receiving from you or your group. I think that's a critical step. And then decide on the action you're going to take. So commit to taking some action and follow up on that action. So I have a few things here that some groups have been able to provide that have been particularly helpful, but you don't need to be limited by this list. It's just suggestions. Sharing ideas and feedback, particularly in the early stages on the public list, is helpful. Also reading and giving feedback on the specifications in Java docs. This one is not as popular with developers, but probably one of the most needed things. So the fact that everything is developed in the open provides the opportunity for feedback and clarifications from the people who are using the technology, but this is probably the one that is least often received, feedback on the specifications, which can be lengthy. But one particular point I have of feedback for you here is you can always just pick one section of the specification and clarify that this is your feedback on this particular section. Downloading the early access builds of the reference implementation. So providing your feedback on that once you download it and run your applications against it, your experience with that is really helpful. In particular for the standalone JSRs, providing sample applications is really useful. Speaking about the technology with people in your local community, sharing about that, educating them if it's applicable, translating some content into your local language. In some areas, that's very helpful to have some information about the technology in the local language. So a few ideas you can do. And again, remember to share these things on the public discussion or issue tracker. This is just a screenshot of an issue tracker. Every project has an open issue tracker and an open discussion forum. Join the list and give your feedback. And then finally, try participating in some type of a hack day or workshop about the technology. A lot of conferences these days offer a hack space. I was just in Barcelona and we had a hacker garden there. This picture is from a hacker garden we did at the Oracle Code 1 in San Francisco, which draws a collection of developers from around the world. But pick a project, design a workshop, educate your local community, and have fun while you're doing it. What you're going to find when you do this is that you grow your connections, you grow your skills, you help yourself to develop some of those softer skills that increasingly employers are looking for from developers to differentiate themselves. So while you need to be on top of all of the technical changes in your field, you will stay on top of that with looking at where the Java technology platform is headed, but you're also going to develop some of those skills that are increasingly important for developers, such as communication, collaboration, critical thinking, leadership, and as well as grow your visibility in the global Java community. So you can participate in any of those ways. I encourage you to also look at joining the adoption group in OpenJDK. That gives you some guidance in terms of downloading the early access builds, as well as a forum to discuss your experience with the early access builds. That's the adoption group. So kind of growing out of that effort I talked about with Adopt-a-JSR is in OpenJDK. There's an actual adoption group that you can join for newcomers that want to discuss and get more involved in the OpenJDK project. Also part of the adoption group is a quality outreach group. So the Quality Outreach Group is free and open source projects around Java. So tools that Java developers use. There's a collection of over 100 different projects who are actively participating in the Quality Outreach Group. And I provide this as an opportunity for you to maybe look at the project and see which things are available there that maybe you're using in your daily environment that you want to contribute to. So that's another opportunity to contribute. So you can, there's a matrix there where you can get in touch with the project leads and offer your assistance and sign up as a contributor to any of those projects. So these will be projects that aren't supported by a corporation but are really dependent on the community to evolve. So a couple of examples I've listed here are the Eclipse Collections project as well as Apache Maven. Those are two projects that have really taken advantage of the community that wants to get involved and participate in evolving their projects. And again, the early access builds are available. So in the adoption group, you can discuss this. This is what the JDK 13 early access builds page will look like, where you can find your download. We need you to participate. I encourage you to follow and join the JCP online as well. You can follow JCP_org on Twitter, or you can follow my personal account, which is HeatherVC. I'll be also participating at Oracle Code 1 if you wanted to join us. That's in 2019, not 2018, September, in San Francisco. That's a great opportunity to interact with the global community. And any questions, if you don't want to ask on Twitter, you can ask them in my email as well. If I've covered anything here that you're interested in discussing in more detail, you can contact me at heather@jcp.org. for questions. I think I have 3 minutes left if we want to answer some questions here. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking with you more. I'll be here through the lunchtime before I head back to San Francisco on an early morning flight. Do we have a couple minutes for questions? Okay. So, any questions? Okay. All right. Well, I encourage you to get involved and participate in the future of Java because, as I said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So I hope I've inspired you with a few ideas on how you personally can get involved and follow along on jcp.org and OpenJDK.